Okay, so you sent over some really um, pretty wild source material this week. It kicks off so subtly, almost like a background detail you'd miss.
Right.
Around 2039,
Yeah.
these really strange clouds start showing up. We call them stratospheric streamers.
Yeah, very thin, barely visible, sometimes rippling almost,
Yeah.
with these faint sort of off-key colors.
Exactly. You'd look up, maybe notice them, think, huh, that's a bit weird, and then just get on with your day.
And that's the unsettling part, isn't it? They weren't like dramatic thunderheads. They were almost ghostly,
Hmm.
so easy to just dismiss.
Hmm.
It's just another odd weather thing, especially with all the climate change noise already happening.
Yeah.
But yeah, those were the first hints.
Totally. And it wasn't just the clouds, right? Then this strange rain started falling.
Mm-hmm.
Not poisonous or anything, thank goodness, but it had these really peculiar side effects.
Like the algae blooms just
Oh,
exploding, yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
And certain soil bacteria dying off and rain literally beating on dry ground. It's just bizarre.
And it took years for anyone to really connect the dots, apparently. These were just isolated incidents, filed away, probably.
Which really makes you think about how we process anomalies, you know? We're
Mm.
usually looking for patterns we recognize.
Absolutely. And the Department of Atmospheric Defense, well, they were set up to deal with known climate threats, severe weather events.
Standard stuff, relatively speaking.
Right. So these very subtle, new kinds of signals, they just got lost in the noise. It wasn't what they were looking for.
Okay, so enter Dr. Eliza Greer, ex-NASA, atmospheric chemist. She knows her stuff.
And crucially, she remembered the Persephone probe's data from Mars back in, what, 2033?
Yeah, Martian clouds showing chemical traces that were spookily similar to these new streamers on Earth.
That's the connection. That's the bit that screamed, not from around here. She saw that link when others were still thinking terrestrial causes.
Even after leaving NASA, she kept digging. That's dedication.
It really is. But you can imagine the reaction she got initially.
Oh, for sure. Publishing papers, maybe talking at conferences, trying to get the word out.
Probably labeled a crank, chasing some fringe theory. We see that pattern often.
Until things take a very sharp turn. She vanishes.
Uh-huh.
And then reappears months later with this bombshell message directly for the Black Aurora Initiative.
Which itself was, operating in the shadows. Not your usual scientific channel.
Definitely not.
Yeah.
And her warning was just stark.
Mm.
They're seeding the upper atmosphere. It's not from Earth, and it's not for us.
Wow. Talk about setting the stage. Suddenly it's not just weird weather. It's potentially something else entirely.
Okay, so that's the setup. Strange phenomena, a dismissed scientist, this cryptic warning. Then comes the proof.
The hard evidence. May 2044, Aleutian Islands. A weather balloon comes back with something unexpected.
Crystalline spores, right, caught in these silica filaments.
Yeah, silica, like glass or sand components, very stable, but the structure was totally alien, nothing found in nature on Earth.
And the kicker, they were subtly self-replicating.
Which means they weren't just inert dust particles drifting down, they were active. And heat-resistant too, apparently.
So definitely not biological in the way we understand it, or at least not our biology.
Correct. But then it get even stranger.
The UV pulse.
Exactly. Expose them to UV light, and they emit this specific pulse. A frequency somewhere between gamma and microwave radiation.
And that's not natural. That points towards something deliberate, right? Like a signal.
That was the conclusion. It implied some form of embedded technology, or at least a non-random designed response. It strongly suggested intelligence.
So from weird dust to potentially intelligent, self-replicating alien tech seeding our atmosphere, that's quite a leap.
A huge leap, and it gave real weight to Dr. Greer's warning.
And their purpose, to
Yeah.
basically rewrite our atmosphere from the top down.
Changing how radiation gets filtered, boosting the greenhouse effect, even messing with the fundamental nitrogen-oxygen balance.
Slowly, though. That's the creepy part. Almost too slow to notice day to day.
But with a long-term goal totally incompatible with human life as we know it.
It's that idea you mentioned, ghost colonization.
Precisely. Terraforming the planet for their needs without ever landing a ship or showing themselves directly, just changing the environment itself.
A silent invasion, essentially. So how did the powers that be react once they had this evidence?
Well, the U.S. government resurrected Project Obsidian Skies.
Stratospheric aerosol injection. That sounds familiar, often in conspiracy circles.
Right, but this time it was real, and the reason was terrifying. They developed this cocktail, black carbon, nanosilver, synthetic nitrogen anchors.
Trying to fight fire with fire? Or rather, spores with aerosols?
Basically, yes. Trying to neutralize or disrupt the spores, but publicly, they framed it as advanced climate change mitigation.
You can see why. Announcing alien spores or terraforming Earth might cause a bit of panic.
Just a bit. It's that classic dilemma. Transparency versus preventing mass hysteria. And initially, Obsidian Skies seemed to be working, or at least slowing things down.
But only for a while.
Only for a while. In 2046, things changed again. The spores adapted.
Adapted how?
They started putting out new frequencies, different patterns. It looked like communication, coordination, like they were reacting intelligently to the aerosols.
Oh, wow. So the countermeasures actually triggered a response.
It seems so, and the consequences were dramatic. Rainfall patterns went haywire, jet streams shifted erratically, the Gulf Stream slowed.
And those weird emerald skies over Greenland,
Yeah.
the whole planet system was reacting.
That's when Eliza Greer delivered that really chilling assessment. They're aware.
Meaning the spores weren't just reacting chemically, they were understanding, responding strategically.
That was the implication. The speed, the coordination. It suggested a networked intelligence. These weren't just passive seeds anymore. They were nano-intelligent scouts.
Scouts preparing the way. So this wasn't an invasion yet to come, it was already happening. An atmospheric occupation.
Exactly. Which led to the next phase, Operation White Veil.
Escalation. Full-on atmospheric warfare.
Drones deploying countermeasures, ionospheric heaters.
Those are the things that beam energy into the upper atmosphere, right? Trying to disrupt things.
Yeah, trying to fry the network or disrupt their communication, and orbital reflectors, too. Basically, throwing the kitchen sink at the sky.
A war fought against clouds. It sounds surreal.
It was unprecedented, a new kind of conflict. But the spores adapted again.
How? What could they do against that?
They started nesting in airplane contrails.
No way.
Yes, effectively hijacking civilian aircraft trails as carriers or shielding, turning our own infrastructure against us.
That's insidious. So what was the response to that?
Drastic. Grounding all global air traffic. Imagine that. The chaos, the economic fallout, the fear.
Unbelievable. The world just stops flying, and then came the absolute last resort.
Aether 9, an emergency compound designed to literally break down the spore's crystalline lattice structure.
The kill switch. But there was a catch. A terrible catch.
A devastating one. It was discovered Aether 9 was also highly toxic to human lung tissue.
So the choice became, let the atmosphere collapse under the spore's influence, or deploy Aether 9 and potentially cause mass respiratory failure across the globe.
An impossible choice. President Cartwright refused to authorize it. You can't blame her. The weight of that decision.
Stuck between planetary suffocation and poisoning your own population. And then, something completely unexpected happened.
The Sequoia signal. 3.33 a.m. GMT.
Not just a random burst of energy, right? It was triangulated.
Over 3 very specific points. The Redwood Forest in California, the Andes Mountains, and the Tibetan Plateau.
Significant locations, and it formed a glyph.
A complex symbol. And it was identical to a glyph recorded by the Persephone probe on Mars years before.
Proof of concept, it was a message.
Direct communication. And the initial decoded message was blunt.
This world has been claimed. You are incompatible. Cease contamination.
Not a declaration of war, almost like a diagnosis. We were the contamination they needed to stop.
From their perspective, Earth was already theirs. We were the invasive species.
A chillingly alien perspective. As Eliza's team deciphered more, they learned about the senders, the Arakhl.
Ancient spacefaring. Using these spores as their primary method of expansion and terraforming.
And crucially, not actively malicious, just indifferent. Like a gardener reading a plot before planting.
We were the weeds. That's somehow almost worse than outright hostility.
It makes negotiation incredibly difficult, but buried in the messages was one phrase.
Submission and assimilation may preserve form.
Eliza's team interpreted that as a potential extremely narrow path. Not surrender, but adaptation.
Partial assimilation, changing ourselves biologically to fit into their modified ecosystem.
That was the theory. A fundamental alteration of human biology to allow coexistence.
What a concept. So the final War Council meeting, the options were stark.
Option 1. Deploy Aether 9. Save the atmosphere, kill millions, maybe billions, through respiratory failure.
Option 2. Submit to assimilation, whatever that truly entailed. A complete unknown, potentially the end of humanity as we know it.
Or option 3. The madness, as some called it. Project Equinox.
Eliza Greer's proposal.
Her radical idea. A counteragent, but not a destructive one. A symbiotic virus.
How'd it work?
It was designed to mimic the Arakhl spore structure, but carry human DNA markers, essentially embedding ourselves into their atmospheric network.
Biodiplomacy. Trying to signal we can coexist.
That was the hope. An incredibly high-risk gamble. They had less than 90 days to sequence genomes, synthesize the virus, deploy it
The
globally.
timescale is insane. Failure meant total atmospheric collapse.
Yeah.
Success was completely unknown.
But it was the only option that offered a chance of survival without either mass death or complete surrender to biological rewriting. It was approved May 1st, 2047. Deployment started May 3rd.
And the planet itself seemed to react. These gene quakes.
Yeah, the atmosphere went into spasms, like these two vast biological systems were clashing, interacting on a planetary scale.
And people reported seeing things in the clouds.
Strange phenomena, fleeting images like faces, echoes of memories, impossible colors, like the air itself was dreaming or processing this immense biological negotiation.
And then it stopped.
Abruptly, silence. The atmosphere stabilized. Oxygen levels stopped dropping. Natural clouds started forming again.
And the spore emissions.
They changed,
Hmm.
became less structured, less aggressive, more diffuse, almost, dare I say, peaceful. It clearly indicated a response from the Arakhl.
And the final message.
Unmistakable. A single massive glyph burned into the sky over the ruins of old Washington, D.C., visible for 23 minutes.
What did it say?
Just 2 words in their language. You may stay.
Wow. Not welcome. Not
Yeah.
friends. Just permission. A truce.
A truce mediated by biology, by the atmosphere itself. So by 2050, Earth is different.
The green auroras, faster crop growth, stable weather, remnants of the Arakhl system, now integrated.
Seems like it. And the subtle changes in newborns, enhanced resilience, cognitive shifts, occasional faint bioluminescence.
Hybrid markers. Tangible evidence of Project Equinox working, of assimilation on our terms, sort of.
It wasn't a human victory. It wasn't an Arakhl victory. It was a new equilibrium, a shared planet.
And Eliza Greer.
Became a legend, almost mythical. Black Aurora was quietly dissolved, replaced by the Global Atmospheric Command, focused on monitoring this new peace.
So the lingering thought, the real takeaway from all this.
It's that connection, isn't it? Every human born since Equinox carries a trace, a subtle link to the Arakhl within their very biology.
What does that mean for who we are now? What does human even mean in a world subtly intertwined with an ancient, indifferent alien intelligence that reshaped our sky?
That's the question, isn't it? Our definition of ourselves, our place in the universe, fundamentally altered, forever.